traditions and customs. No one really knows the actual origin of Valentine's Day. Many historians, however, seem to trace it to an ancient Roman festival called Lupercalion. This was held on February 15 to honor Faunus, the god of animal life, hunting, herding, the patron of husbandry, and the guardian of the secret lore of nature. After Christianity spread, some think this pagan festival eventually became Valentine's Day. Other experts connect Valentine's Day with two saints of the early Christian church. According to one story, Saint Valentine was a priest who would marry young couples against the orders of the Roman Emperor Claudius II, who believed that single young men made better soldiers. This story goes back to about AD 200. There also was another Saint Valentine who was a good friend to children. Because he would not worship gods decreed by the Roman emperor, he was put in prison. While he was imprisoned, the children that he had befriended missed him and brought him loving notes. Many of the notes expressed the thought that absence makes the heart grow fonder. He was supposedly executed on February 14 in AD 270. Some people think this is why we exchange friendly and caring messages on this day. Others believe that the word Valentine came from a Norman word galantine, which means a gallant or a lover. Some people connect the celebrating of Valentine's Day with an Old English belief that birds choose their mates on February 14. This, too, is possible, since spring was less than a month away. The calendar used before 1582 was slightly different from the one we use now. Spring arrived on March 11 on the old calendar. Many old-fashioned Valentine's Day customs involved ways single women could learn who their future husbands might be. In England in the 1700s, women wrote men's names on scraps of paper, rolled each in a ball of clay, and dropped them into water. The first paper that surfaced supposedly had the name of the woman's true love. The custom of sending Valentine cards started in Europe in the 1700s. Commercial Valentines were first made in the early 1800s. Kate Greenaway, a British artist, was one of the leading makers of Valentines. Her Valentines are known for the varied drawings of little children and the varied shades of blues and greens that she favored. Whatever the origin, Valentine's Day is celebrated in many parts of the world today and is a holiday for both young and old.
Saint Valentine's Day. There are many legends about Saint Valentine. Legends are stories that are handed down from the past. One of the customs the young people liked was name drawings. The names of the Roman girls were written on slips of paper and put into a jar. Each young man drew a slip. The girl whose name he drew was to be his sweetheart for a year. Young people hoped to find their own mates on Valentine's Day. They chanted magic charms and spells, trying to make their wishes come true. This pagan magic had been added to the holiday by the British. Other kinds of magic were tried on Valentine's Eve. One young lady pinned 4 bay leaves to the corners of her pillow and one in the middle. Then she dreamed of her sweetheart. She thought that meant she would be married to him soon. She also tried something else. Saint Valentine's Day came to be celebrated in most of the countries of Europe. Sicily is an island south of Italy. There a young girl would stand at her window for half an hour before sunrise. If no one went by, she believed she would not be married that year. If she saw a man pass, she thought she would marry him, or someone who looked like him. In Germany the girls tried another way of learning whom they would marry. They planted onions on Saint Valentine's Day. Each girl tagged several day onions with the names of young men. She put the onions in a corner near the fireplace. She thought she would marry the man whose onions sprouted first. A French princess, Madame Royale, named her palace the Valentine. She had grand Valentine parties in the early 1600s. There were dancing and name drawing. The princess did not draw a name. She chose her own partner, but she made her guests draw names. Each knight gave flowers to the lady whose name he drew. He gave her flowers at each dance they attended that year. Valentine parties became popular in many wealthy French homes. The young ladies and gentlemen put verses into a Valentine box. They put their names into the box too, on different slips. Then each person drew a name and a verse. The gentleman read his verse to the lady. She read hers to him. Often the verse did not match the person and everyone laughed.
The first paper Valentine. Verses and other Valentine greetings were popular even in the Middle Ages. At that time few people could read or write. Lovers usually said or sang their valentines to their sweethearts. Written valentines began about 1400. The oldest one we know of was made in 1415. A Frenchman, Charles, Duke of Orleans, was captured by the English in a battle. He was put in prison in the Tower of London. There he wrote Valentine poems. Many of them were saved and can be seen today in the British Museum. The idea of paper valentines spread through Europe. They began to take the place of Valentine gifts. Paper valentines were especially popular in England. For a long time valentines were made by hand. The sender often wrote his own message in verse. Sometimes he used pretty colored paper and even colored ink. In the early 1800s, factories began to make valentines. Black and white pictures were printed on pretty paper. Some of them were painted by workers in the factory. But most people bought plain pictures and did their own painting. Some valentines had verses printed on them. Then valentines became more fancy. At first, the fancy valentines were trimmed with ribbons and real lace. About 1840, factories began to make paper lace. A long strip of paper was run through great rollers. The rollers stamped or cut a lacy pattern on the edges of the paper. Then the strip was cut into pieces the size of valentines. These valentines were only one page. Workers painted pictures in the middle of the paper. Other workers sewed or glued ornaments onto the pictures or the paper lace edges. Later, factories made folded valentines. The inside page had a printed verse and the front page was a picture. The edges were of paper lace. Sometimes workers pasted 2 or 3 layers of lace on the front, one above the other. Little strips of paper held each layer above the next. The center was open. This made a frame for the picture. Sometimes there were ornaments on each layer of lace. These ornaments were made of silk, satin, velvet or spun glass. Even feathers were used. Making valentines by hand was slow and costly. The manufacturers began to make cheaper valentines. They stamped the pictures and ornaments directly on the cards. By the end of the 19th century, valentines could be bought for a few pennies. They were made entirely by machines. The colors were bright. The paper lace was coarse. These were quite different from the lovely, dainty valentines that were made earlier.
Valentine symbols in the story of Cupid. The ornaments that decorate valentines are symbols of love and friendship. Ornaments for early valentines were made by hand. Each had a special meaning. A fan meant, "Open up your heart." A ribbon meant, "You are tied up," or "You are my girl." Lace is the same on a valentine meant, "You have caught my heart in a net." At valentine parties, romantic symbols were sometimes hidden in a cake. Each guest got a slice and, if he was lucky, a symbol. The symbol told his fortune. Sometimes the symbols were put in gift packages instead. Rice meant a wedding. A ring meant a wedding too, or an engagement. A coin meant the person would marry someone wealthy. Sometimes a boy got a red mitten. To get the mitten meant his girl did not like him. Hearts are the most common romantic symbol. Candy, cookies, and even cakes are made in heart shapes for Valentine parties. Little hearts appear on valentines themselves. Wedding rings and lovers' knots tie the couple together. Angels and children bless a happy marriage. Harps and lyres play romantic music. One of the most famous Valentine symbols is Cupid with his bow and arrow. He goes back to Roman times. Here is a story the Romans told about him. Cupid was the son of a beautiful goddess, Venus. Wherever Venus went, Cupid went too. He was a gay little god and he liked to see people happy. He went around shooting gold-tipped arrows into the hearts of humans. Then they fell in love. Venus, his mother, had a golden mirror. She looked into it every day. She saw the most beautiful face in the world. One day Cupid found his mother crying. "Alas," she said, "I have lost my golden mirror." Cupid went in search of the mirror. He looked here and looked there, but he could not find it. Then he flew over a meadow where some sheep were grazing. Among the sheep stood a shepherd. As Cupid looked down, beams of light flashed up into his eyes. He saw that the light came from something in the shepherd's hand. The little god flew low over the shepherd and his flock. The sheep were startled by sound of his wings. They began to bleat and run away. The shepherd looked up. Cupid saw his rough bearded face. He saw, too, what the shepherd held in his hand. It was Venus's golden mirror. The little god was angry. He cried out, "You have dared to look at your ugly face in my beautiful mother's mirror." He struck the mirror from the shepherd's hand. It fell to the ground and broke into hundreds of pieces. Plants with beautiful blossoms sprang up where the mirror had broken. Later the people called the flowers Venus's looking glass.
Novelties in comics. During the 1800s, Valentine's styles kept changing. Some Valentines were strange, some comic, some beautiful. The beautiful ones were designed by artists. One English artist was Kate Greway. She became famous for her illustrated verses for children. Kate earned her first money drawing and painting Valentines and Christmas cards. She sold her first Valentine design for $15. The company that manufactured the Valentines sold 25,000 copies of it. Kate Greenaway liked the clothes that people had worn in earlier times. She drew little girls in long dresses and capes and straw hats with ribbons. She also designed dolls or girl dolls and designed costumes for them. Then she painted pictures from these models. People liked Kate's pictures. Little girls began to wear dresses like those in her picture books and valentines. In the mid-1800s, Englishmen were digging for gold in Australia. They ordered expensive valentines from England for their wives and sweethearts. The miners liked a lot of real gold in the decorations. One valentine, made for the miners, was 2 feet long. It had rows of colored pictures and borders of gold and silver lace. Valentines with moving parts began to be popular. Usually there was a stick of cardboard in the back. This stick made some part of the valentine move. Often doors or windows opened. One valentine showed 2 lovers walking through a churchyard. When the church door was opened, a wedding could be seen inside. Another mechanical valentine had a man pushing a baby carriage. One novelty valentine had a stuffed hummingbird pasted onto it. Another had a little package of perfume. Still another had a lady's nightcap. This valentine said, "Good night, dear. And in your thoughts forget me not." Along with these novelties, the comic valentines were popular. They poked fun at people, or at their jobs. The pictures were like those in cartoons. The colors were bright and often ugly. These comics could be mean, but they were amusing too, and many of them were sold.
Valentines in America. Valentines probably came to this country with the earliest English settlers. Puritans from England settled Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. John Winthrop was their first governor. Before he left for America, he started a letter to his wife, February 14, 1629. "Thou must be my Valentine." At first, the colonists were so busy battling the wilderness that they did not have time to make many valentines. But as the years went by, valentines became more common. During the winter months in America, there was little farm work. A young man could spend many hours making a valentine if he wished. When February 14 came, he folded his valentine and sealed it with sealing wax. Then he delivered it himself. Mail in colonial times was expensive and irregular. Men often sent valentines as proposals of marriage. Sometimes the young lady sent one in return, saying yes. Of course, there were far more valentines of all kinds sent by men than by women. Some of the senders were fine artists. Their valentines were beautifully drawn and colored. The writing was beautiful too. Cutouts were popular. The paper was folded several times and then cut with scissors or a sharp knife. When it was unfolded, it showed a design. Often a lock of hair was enclosed in a valentine. It was meant as a love token. Silhouettes were also popular. The young man sent a silhouette picture of himself. If the young lady liked it, she might hang the picture on the wall. Books called Valentine Riders were sold as early as 1823. These had many Valentine verses. People who could not think up their own greetings copied verses from the book. These lines, used in the 1700s, are still popular today. "The rose is red, the violet blue, lilies are fair, and so are you." Sometimes the sender folded his valentine this way and that as he wrote his verse. Then he opened the paper. The lady who got the valentine had to figure out how to fold it back again so she could read the message. In the late 1700s, stores started selling special letter paper for valentines. There were decorations printed around the edges. The sender wrote his verses in the middle. One of the first stores to sell imported valentines was in Worcester, Massachusetts. It belonged to a Mr. Rowland who sold writing supplies and books. Someone sent Mr. Howland's daughter, Esther, a lacy valentine from England in 1847. It was the first English valentine she had ever seen. Her friends thought it was beautiful. Her father decided to import some valentines to sell. Esther was so pleased with them, she made one of her own. Mr. Howland did not import any more valentines. Instead, he imported paper lace, colored paper and paper flowers. Esther wanted to make the valentines herself. Soon Esther had hundreds of orders. How could she make that many valentines before St. Valentine's Day? Her friends helped her. One girl cut out the pictures. Another glued the tiny paper flowers to the paper lace. Another painted in leaves and vines and flowers. Soon all the orders were filled. The valentine business grew. Esther hired many helpers who worked in her home. They sat at long tables under a skylight on the top floor. Each girl did one part of the work and then passed the valentine to the next. Later, Esther bought machinery to do some of the work. She also manufactured Christmas cards, May baskets and other holiday favors. Soon her business was earning $100,000 a year. Some of Esther Howland's things were expensive. A young man had paid $10 for one of her May baskets. He sent it to a girl and asked her to marry him. The girl said no. She would not marry anyone who spent money so foolishly.
Yesterday and today. Esther Howland's fancy valentines made Valentine's Day more popular than it had been before. Soon many factories were making elaborate lacy valentines. In 1847, the post office began to sell 5 and 10 cent stamps. One of these stamps would take a valentine any place in the United States. That year, 3 million valentines were sold. Many valentines were sent to soldiers during the Civil War. A lot of these were comics. The pictures were funny, but often the messages were romantic. In the 1880s, valentines became more elaborate than ever. The centers were often stuffed satin, the edges trimmed with lace tassels. There were shadow boxes with valentine scenes inside. Special valentines were made for children. They liked the mechanical ones imported from Germany. In the early 1900s, automobiles were new and exciting. So were automobile valentines with wheels that really moved. There are special valentines for parents, children, cousins, teachers and friends. And there are boxes of valentine parts for children to put together. Children today send more valentines than grown-ups. Probably Americans send more valentines than all other countries put together. In 1963, we bought 550 million of them. That is nearly 3 times as many people as we have in this country.
Valentine parties. As Valentines became more and more popular, so did Valentine parties. Children in the 19th century played drop the handkerchief at their parties. The boy kissed the girl who dropped the handkerchief, but he had to catch her first. Post office, another kissing game, was also popular. Grown-ups had Valentine dinners and dances. Sometimes the dancers wore masks and dressed like famous couples, Jack and Jill, Cinderella and the Prince, the King and Queen of Hearts. In 1894, a fashionable lady made place cards of folding hearts for her party. The menu was printed inside the hearts. Today we still keep many of the old Valentine customs. Girls tell fortunes. They count the buttons on their clothes, saying, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, doctor, lawyer, merchant, chief. The last button is supposed to tell which man the girl will marry. The English colonists had brought the custom of telling fortunes with them. They cut apples in 2 and counted the seeds with this verse. 1 I love, 2 I love, 3 I love, I say 4 I love with all my heart. 5 I cast away. 6 he loves, 7 she loves, 8 they both love, 9 he comes, 10 he tarries, 11 he courts, 12 he marries. The Dutch people of Old New York celebrated Vrouwendaar Women's Day in February. Young ladies ran about carrying ropes. They beat any young men they met. The blows did not hurt, but the young men made a lot of noise. It was great fun for everyone. Later, only children followed this custom. The girls chased the boys and beat them. In one school the boys asked for Manendag, Men's Day. They said they wanted to get even with the girls. Boys and girls have Valentine parties at school or home. They make heart chains, offered paper for decorations. Sometimes gold and silver arrows are used. These are Cupid's arrows. Paper doilies are often trimmed with hearts or flowers. Roses and forget-me-nots are symbols of love. Strawberry, raspberry, or peppermint ice cream is often used, as red is the Valentine color. Cakes, cookies and candies are made in heart shapes and decorated in pink or red. The Valentine symbols are still the same. There is a Valentine box at the Valentine party. It is usually made out of an old hat box or a big shoe box decorated with crepe paper. Each boy or girl takes a turn reaching into the box. Or a postmaster passes the Valentines out. The Valentine box is even older than Valentines. When we draw Valentines from a box, we are like the Romans who drew names from a jar. We are keeping a custom that began more than 2,000 years ago. It is wonderful to think how many people have said, "Be my Valentine."
True love, or endless love knot. The true love or endless love knot was usually a hand-drawn, hand-colored maze, sometimes forming a pattern such as interlocking hearts. The verses written inside the complicated paths had no beginning and no end. The message could be read beginning at random from any line. The Valentines were often bordered with flowers and cupids. They weren't easy to make, and those who received them spent a long time figuring them out.